Hey, Pops, you sure you're on the right dock? The shuffleboard tournament's about 2 miles north. The laughter that followed was quick and easy. The laughter of young men in a place where they are powerful, where every surface reflects their own competence back at them, and nothing has yet arrived to complicate that picture. Petty Officer First Class Derek Sauer, Naval Special Warfare Group 1, stood with his arms crossed and his weight easy on both feet. A rangy man of 31, with close-cropped hair, and the satisfied expression of someone who has just said a thing in front of an audience and had it land the way he intended. Behind him, on the pier, 4 other SEALs in training gear were loading equipment onto the dive tender, pausing their work to take in the exchange with the appreciative attention of men who respect a well-delivered line. The pier smelled the way piers do when the day is still young and the tide is coming in. Salt and diesel and wet wood, and the faint copper edge of rust from the old cleats. The whole thing held together by the particular smell of seawater warming in the morning sun. Gulls moved overhead in slow, indifferent arcs. The dive tender sat low and patient at the dock, its engines idling at a frequency you felt more in your chest than heard with your ears. Down the pier, a pelican stood on a piling and regarded the proceedings with the dignified neutrality of a creature that has outlasted everyone's opinions. The old man the laughter was directed at had not responded to it. He was 81 years old. He stood near the bollard at the pier's edge, wearing a plain navy work shirt tucked into khaki pants with a crease that spoke of long habit, and shoes that had been worn and resoled and worn again until they had acquired the contours of the feet inside them. He carried no bag. His hands rested loosely at his sides, the knuckles large and unhurried, the skin the color and texture of old saddle leather. The kind of hands that have been put to serious use and have the permanent evidence of that use written into them. The limp was slight, a rocking in the right hip when he walked, the kind you stop noticing after a while, because the man carrying it clearly stopped noticing it a long time ago. His name was Thomas Eugene Farrow. He had not turned when Sauer spoke. He was looking out at the water, at the particular quality of morning light on San Diego Bay, the way it came off the surface in long flat plains. The color of pewter shot through with silver. His face was weathered and spare, the kind of face that has been simplified by decades of sun and salt and early mornings. Every unnecessary thing burned away until what was left was essential. His eyes, when they finally moved from the water to Sauer, were pale blue, the color of a winter sky before the clouds come in, clear and cold and carrying. In their depth, something that could not be read quickly. "Just looking for the harbor master's office," he said. His voice was a low, even sound, unhurried as a tide. "I may have taken the wrong turn at the gate." "Yeah, you definitely did, Pops." Sauer unfolded his arms and let his weight shift forward with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to controlling the geometry of a space. "This is an active Stubacy and sealed dive ops pier, not really a sightseeing situation." He gestured down the dock with the open-handed sweep of a man who is enjoying the performance of explaining something obvious. "Harbor masters back out the gate, turn left, follow the civilian access road. Hard to miss." He paused, and something in his expression found a second gear, a private amusement deciding to go public. "You a veteran, sir? Served somewhere along the way?" The question was not asked out of respect. It was asked the way a card player asks a question when he already knows the answer will confirm his hand. Thomas looked at him for a moment with those pale blue eyes. "I was in the Navy," he said. "Navy?" Sauer nodded as if receiving important information. "Whereabouts? What you do?" "Little of everything," Thomas said. Quiet, precise, not evasive. The answer of a man who has learned that most answers require more context than the question deserves. Sauer turned to his teammates on the tender. "Little of everything," he repeated, and the phrasing in his mouth was an instrument of gentle ridicule. Not cruel, not vicious, but performing for the room, or the pier, with the confidence of a man who has never yet had an audience fail him. Cook? Supply? You know we don't discriminate here. Every rate matters. He delivered the last sentence with the careful sincerity of a man constructing irony out of plain materials. One of the men on the tender laughed. Another kept loading gear, his back turned, saying nothing. I appreciate that, Thomas said, and he said it as if he meant it, which threw the performance slightly off its footing. Sauer recovered. He took 2 steps toward Thomas, closing the distance with the easy confidence of a man who has spent years operating in small spaces with high stakes and has no particular relationship with hesitation. Listen, no offense intended, but this area is secured for operations, and I'm going to need you to head back toward the gate. You understand? I understand, Thomas said. He didn't move, not defiantly, not stubbornly. Simply the way a man stands when he is waiting for something that has not yet arrived, and he has enough experience with waiting that the act itself requires no energy. The pier around them had gone slightly quieter. The 2 men who had been loading gear were no longer loading gear. The gulls described their slow arcs. The diesel engine idled in the chest. Sauer's expression shifted. Not to anger, not yet, but to the particular sharpening that happens when a performance meets unexpected resistance and must recalibrate. He looked at the old man, the khaki pants, the work shirt, the slight rocking of the right hip when Thomas had walked to his position. And now, this total, unconcerned stillness. Something about the stillness was starting to ask a question that Sauer did not have a ready answer for, which was exactly why he pushed past it. What branch? He said, the amusement coming back, sharpened now, a different instrument. Before, you said the Navy. What rate? What ship? When were you in? His tone had acquired a new edge, the edge of a man who has decided that persistence and precision will produce the admission of smallness he is looking for. I asked because the way you said it, little of everything, sounds like you did a short enlistment somewhere in the peacetime Navy, filled some sandbags, fixed some paperwork, and now you want to stand on an operational pier. He paused. Am I close? Thomas let that sit for a moment. On the tender, the man who had kept loading gear had stopped. He was younger than the others, a junior petty officer named Reyes, new to the team, 24 years old, and he had been listening with the particular quality of attention that people pay when they sense that the shape of a situation is not what it appears to be. He had been watching the old man since the exchange began. Something in the way the old man stood, relaxed but rooted. The way a dock piling is rooted. The kind of stillness that suggests the deep thing is anchored and the surface will do whatever the surface does, had produced in Reyes a persistent, low-level unease. He had noticed the patch on the old man's shirt pocket, nearly hidden by the fold of the fabric, a small embroidered patch, faded to near illegibility. He had noticed it, but not registered it. The way you notice things that your eyes catch before your brain decides to care. You're not close, Thomas said to Sauer, and the words were simple and quiet and carried no particular heat. But they landed clearly, the way a stone lands when dropped from a sufficient height. Sauer took the final step to close the distance between them. He was taller than Thomas by 3 inches, younger by 45 years, broader across the chest and shoulders, carrying every physical and institutional advantage that the situation contained, and he had the manner of a man who knows all of this and has always found it sufficient. He reached out and placed 2 fingers against the patch on the old man's shirt pocket. Not grabbing, not tearing, just touching it with the light, dismissive contact of someone handling something they have already decided does not matter. "What's this supposed to be, then?" he said. The world went away. There was no pier, no diesel smell, no morning light on the bay. There was dark water, and it was not calm. He was 23 years old, and he was in the water in the dark, and the water was the South China Sea, which in January 1967 was cold enough to produce a specific and efficient kind of suffering, and dark enough to produce a specific and efficient kind of fear. And the combination of those two things was something you either learned to work inside of, or you did not come back. He had learned to work inside of it. That was what the previous 4 years had been for. His name in the water that night was not Thomas. In the water, he was Tide. That was the call sign, not assigned, not official, but earned. The way the real names are always earned. He had been given it by Chief Petty Officer Harlan Webb, a compact Georgian with hands like vice grips and eyes like a man who had made a permanent peace with the worst possibilities. After Thomas had completed a combat swimmer approach in 6-foot seas against a current that had folded 2 other operators back to the boat. "You move through bad water the way a tide moves," Webb had told him afterward. Not loud, not quiet, just inevitable. And Thomas had carried that name into every dark water since. There were 6 of them in the water. A SEAL platoon swimmer element, operating under classified tasking out of Naval Advisory Detachment NANG, in support of an operation that did not officially exist, and would not officially exist for decades. Their target was a communications installation on a river mouth peninsula, and the approach required 2 kilometers of open water at night against a 2-knot tidal current that did not care about their timeline. Webb was on his left, 2 meters. On his right, Garcia, behind him. The others whose names he would carry the rest of his life, in the specific, permanent way you carry names that were present when everything became serious. At the 3/4 point of the approach, Garcia took a round, not from the installation, from a patrol boat that had been running dark and had come around the southern headland at exactly the wrong moment for everyone. The sound of it was specific and compact, the specific sound of a round that has found what it was looking for. Garcia made a sound. Thomas moved. What happened in the next 40 minutes was not heroism in the way the word is usually used. It was not brave exactly in the way the word is usually used. It was more like arithmetic, a series of decisions made in sequence under conditions that reduced each decision to its simplest form. And Thomas made each one, and at the end of it, Garcia was still alive, though his left arm was not working, and would not work the same way again. And Thomas had a piece of the patrol boat's railing in his right hip that would stay there irretrievably lodged until the end of his life, because the surgery to remove it carried risks that eventually stopped being worth taking. Webb found him in the water after it was over. He grabbed Thomas by the shoulder, the grip of a man who is checking that something is still intact, the grip that says, "I am here and you are here, and that is the relevant information." Thomas felt the hand and knew whose hand it was, and they floated together for a moment in the dark water of the South China Sea, with the stars visible in the breaks between the clouds, and Webb did not say anything that Thomas could remember later. But he did not need to. The grip said it all. You moved through that like a tide. You brought the man home. Garcia lost the use of 2 fingers permanently. He retired as a chief petty officer 21 years later, and at his retirement ceremony, without being asked, he said 3 sentences about Thomas Farrow, and then did not say anything else because he did not need to. Thomas carried the piece of railing in his hip from that night forward. It produced the slight rocking limp that Sauer had just mocked on a pier in San Diego, 47 years later. The pier came back in full. The diesel, the salt, the morning light. Sauer's 2 fingers resting on the faded patch. Thomas did not move. His face had not changed. The pale blue eyes held Sauer's gaze with the same quality they had held it from the beginning. Clear, patient, deep, and carrying something that had never been intended for people who had not earned access to it. On the tender, Reyes had set down the equipment he was holding. He was looking at the patch on the old man's shirt pocket. In the clear morning light, close enough now to resolve the faded embroidery, he had recognized it. He knew it. He had seen it once before, in a photograph in a glass case in a building on the east side of this base that most people walked past without stopping. He stepped back into the wheelhouse and reached for his phone. He had a number, not admin, not his section chief, but the number of Senior Chief Ruiz, given to him during command orientation 3 months ago with the words, "If you see something that doesn't look right and you can't fix it yourself, you call me directly, anytime." Ruiz answered on the second ring. Reyes kept his voice below the pier noise. "Senior Chief, I'm on the ops pier. Sauer's got a situation with an older civilian. I need you to ask me what name I'm about to tell you." A pause. "What name?" "Thomas Farrow. There's a patch on his pocket." At 12. The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was the silence of a line that has received something of a specific and serious weight. It lasted 4 full seconds. When Ruiz came back, every unnecessary thing had been stripped from his voice. "Say that name again. Thomas Farrow. Is he all right?" "He's fine. Sauer has been. It's been handled poorly. Do not let anyone touch him." The quality of it reached Reyes in his sternum. "Hold your position. I'm coming. And get me Walsh. Tell him it's about tide." The line went dead. Reyes stepped back out onto the tender. Sauer was still close to Thomas, still carrying the performance. The old man stood exactly as he had from the beginning. Loose, rooted. His pale eyes resting on Sauer with the patient, absolute calm of deep water. Reyes set down his gear and said nothing. He waited, carrying the weight of what was coming, watching Sauer do the one thing that could not now be stopped, continue. The sound arrived before anything was visible. Rapid footsteps on dock wood, multiple sets, moving with coordinated purpose. Then, 3 figures came around the corner of the equipment building, 2 in working uniforms and the third in service dress. And the third was Commander James Walsh, Naval Special Warfare Group 1, and he was not moving at the pace of a man who has all morning. Sauer's 2 fingers came off the patch. Walsh had a face like a coastal cliff, shaped by exposure, reduced to its structural essentials, not unkind but nothing wasted. He moved down the pier without looking at Sauer, without looking at anyone except the old man at the bollard, and he walked directly to him. He stopped. He looked at Thomas Farrow, the plain work shirt, the faded patch, the pale eyes that had not changed and did not change now. Commander James Walsh came to attention. And then he brought his hand up in the sharpest, most breathtakingly precise salute that Petty Officer First Class Derek Sauer had ever witnessed in 11 years of service. A salute with nothing performative in it. No audience consideration. No career arithmetic. A salute that was simply the accurate outward expression of an inward fact, held in the salt air of San Diego Bay, directed at the old man in the worn shoes with the slight rocking limp. The salute held. 1 second. 2, 3, 4. Every sound on the pier was gone. The men on the tender had turned. Sauer stood 2 feet away with his jaw fractionally open, watching the architecture of everything he had assumed collapse quietly and completely. Thomas Farrow returned the salute, a smaller motion, abbreviated by the years, but perfectly correct. Walsh lowered his hand. "It's an honor, sir. I apologize. I didn't know you were coming in." He looked at Thomas for a moment, then turned to face the pier. His voice did not rise. It carried anyway. "This man is Thomas Eugene Farrow. In January 1967, operating with Underwater Demolition Team 12 in a classified combat swimmer operation off the Vietnamese coast, he completed a 2-kilometer open-water approach under fire against a 2-knot current and extracted a wounded teammate while sustaining a shrapnel wound to his right hip that he has carried for 57 years. Walsh's voice was level and exact, each word set down like something being placed on record. He was awarded the Navy Cross for that night, the Silver Star for a Mekong Delta operation 2 years later. 3 Vietnam tours, 11 years as UT and SEAL instructor cadre. His qualification records are still referenced in this command's training files. A pause. His call sign was Tide. His teammates gave it to him because, they said, he moved through bad water the way a tide moves, not loud, not quiet, but inevitable. Walsh let that sit in the salt air. The Limp P01 Sauer joked about this morning is that shrapnel from 1967. It has been part of him since before most of you were born. He turned back to Sauer, his voice unchanged. P01 Sauer, my office, 1400, service record and uniform. Do you understand? Sauer said, "Yes, Commander." Walsh nodded. Then he stepped back slightly, and Thomas Farrow stepped forward. Thomas looked at Sauer for a long moment with the pale blue eyes. He was not a tall man. He was 81 years old with a slight rocking limp and a work shirt faded from decades of laundering, and he stood in front of this young, broad-shouldered petty officer with the absolute stillness of a man who has never needed height or volume to be heard. He raised his hand and placed it on Sauer's arm, not the shoulder, not a mirror of what had been done, but the arm, a different gesture. The gesture of one man to another at the end of something that required resolution. "You're carrying a lot of fire," Thomas said. His voice was the low, even-tide sound, devoid of triumph, devoid of punishment. "That's good. This work needs fire. Don't let them train it out of you." He paused. His hand stayed on the arm. But fire without water sinks ships. The water is knowing what you don't know, knowing that the man in front of you is carrying something you can't see yet. He paused again, and the pause had weight. The water is patience. The tide gets everywhere eventually. It doesn't have to announce itself. He removed his hand. He looked at Walsh. "I think I can find the harbor master from here," he said. "I'll walk you, sir," Walsh said. "I know the way," Thomas said, and the words were simple and kind and absolutely final. He nodded once, to Walsh, to Reyes, to the men on the tender, to Sauer last, and then he turned and walked back down the pier toward the gate, the slight rocking of his right hip steady and unhurried. The worn shoes on the old dock boards, the morning light moving around him, and the whole pier was still and quiet, and every man on it watched him go. 8 weeks later, in a diner on the waterfront side of Coronado, a man in civilian clothes sat in a corner booth pushing scrambled eggs around a plate. He was thinner than he had been. The easy confidence was still there, but quieter, more internal, no longer interested in the room's attention. He had spent 6 weeks in a mandatory command review process, reading operational records and writing summaries and sitting in the particular discomfort of someone who has been handed a mirror and has taken the time to actually look. Thomas Farrow came through the door at 8:20, walked to the counter, and ordered coffee. He was turning to find a seat when he saw Sauer in the corner booth. He walked over. Sauer looked up. He started to stand, and Thomas waved him back down and sat across from him without being invited, the way a man sits who is not making a ceremony of anything. "You didn't have to do that," Sowers said. "On the pier. What you said." "I know," Thomas said. "I was wrong," Sowers said. "About all of it." He stopped. He had rehearsed some version of this several times, and it had always sounded better in his head than it did in his mouth. "I saw a limp and an old shirt, and I made up the rest. I made up a whole person out of nothing." Thomas wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "We all do that," he said. "The cure isn't feeling bad about it. The cure is staying curious, asking the question before you write the answer." Sauer looked at him. "I'm sorry, sir, I know you are," Thomas said simply. He picked up the menu from behind the napkin holder and set it on the table between them. "You eaten?" Sauer looked at the menu. "Not really." "Then, eat," Thomas said. He flagged the waitress and turned back to the water outside the window, the bay in the morning light, the same pewter and silver surface he had been watching on the pier 2 months ago, when a young man had made a joke about his limp and set in motion everything that followed. There are quiet men who walk among us carrying wounds we cannot see, histories we did not earn the right to know, and a patience born of having outlasted more than we have yet imagined. They do not ask to be recognized. They ask only not to be mistaken for something smaller than they are. Most of the time, they forgive us when we are. If you are moved by Thomas's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.